show. We are live on the podcast, and we are excited to have Jamie Gull. And Jamie is with Talon, spelled Talyn. Really cool spelling for that. And the company is perfecting electric vertical takeoff and landing for unmanned vehicles. Jamie, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, Peter. It's awesome to be here.
Hey, so tell me more about electric vertical takeoff and landing, particularly for unmanned vehicles. What are the applications? And tell me about the journey to get there.
Yeah, so a lot of the details in the name there, it's electric. We're doing fully battery electric. It's electric propulsion also. And it's vertical takeoff and landing. So it's just like a helicopter, takes off from a pad, not a runway. And this enables you to not use runways. So you can take off from buildings, from parking lots, from warehouse roofs, etc. And we're developing this for unmanned applications, so cargo, to move around whatever you want in our aircraft system. And this is a relatively nascent industry, recently kind of brought around by Tesla actually developing battery packs that have good enough energy density, like can carry enough energy in a small pack to actually make flight possible, not just electric cars. And so it's growing, and it's got a lot of really cool benefits over helicopters that make it viable, which is low noise, low climate impact, and much lower cost because the vehicles are actually less complex without having these really big turbine engines and the rotors with the single point of failure. You know, if something breaks on a helicopter, it usually falls out of the sky, which isn't great. And eVTOLs have redundancy there with multiple rotors, and so they're safer.
Oh, super cool. But it sounds like there's got to be a bunch of technical challenges to overcome to do that. I mean, it sounds futuristic to me. I'm picturing Jetsons. You know, what was the hardest part, that biggest technical challenge you had to overcome, or other challenge to get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, so we're really just getting started, and we're making it even harder. We are doing what we call staged eVTOL. And my co-founder and I worked at SpaceX for about 5 years each and worked on like Falcon 9 reentry and landing. And the idea behind a staged rocket is you get rid of the heavy part when you're done with it, so you can fly the lighter part actually into space. And we're applying the same thinking of that to eVTOLs, where you do a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that launches a fixed wing aircraft that's much more efficient and lighter, that can fly a lot further and faster than an eVTOL. And then we'll do a midair docking with another VTOL aircraft to perform the vertical landing. And that's really the hardest part, is taking two aircraft and relinking them back up in the air. We look at that as a similar challenge to the staged rocket reentry and landing that a lot of people said couldn't be done, or was too hard, or wasn't worth it. And here we are a number of years later, and it's happening multiple times per month, and it's completely changed the industry. So we're looking at that as an unlock for our key technology. We're currently flying subscale prototypes of our tech to develop it, and we're actually scaling up right now to much larger prototypes. We're working closely with the Air Force on both of these programs for development and funding. And we're going to start flying much larger aircraft at the end of this year. So we just moved in a new facility in LA that's got the space to grow the team and build the aircraft.
It sounds awesome. And it looks like you guys are funded by Y Combinator. Is that right?
Yeah, we went through YC in 2020 and got some additional funding coming out of there from a variety of people. So it was a great experience. Highly recommend it.
No, awesome. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into that, if you don't mind, because I know a lot of people that watch are founders of companies that are trying to figure out how to get funded. Can you talk about what the journey was like to go into Y Combinator, and how did you get in, and what are some of the pain points, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, so I mean, YC is pretty famous. It's probably the most prestigious accelerator out there. And it's harder to get into than top tier colleges. I think it's less than 1% acceptance rate. And how do you get in? Network with people who've actually gone. and ask them how, because everybody in that community is willing to help you with your application and how you're thinking about your company and what you need to do to stand out. Everybody likes to give back to that community once they're finished, and it is hard. It's really competitive. It was a really fun process. We went through right when COVID hit, so we didn't get to do the in-person demo day, and they've transitioned to mostly virtual demo days now, I think. And it was awesome. And it really just, what it really does at the end, that is exposes you to investors in a very process-oriented manner. But fundraising is still hard anyway. So if you can't get on there, like, keep at it. And I would say my one piece of advice for fundraising is it's a full-time job. It takes a long time. And it's most successful when you network your way in rather than trying to cold email or call investors.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely agree with that one. What about the fundraising process? What was like a total shock to you compared to like what you thought? I'm sure it's super different from an engineering process. And what was like totally a surprise when you first went about it?
Yeah, I think, everybody says, and I just said it, it's a full-time job, and you're like, okay, cool, whatever. It is. And that was a bit of a shock. The other part that was a shock is it's also incredibly repetitive and draining. You're given the same pitch over and over to a lot of people. And I don't, it's very rare for a company to pitch 5 investors, especially at seed stage, and succeed. That comes later on when you have traction. I think people misjudge how many people they're gonna have to pitch. And YC says too, like, look, you're gonna make 100 pitches after demo day. And you get a little wide-eyed, and the best companies, the hottest ones in the batch, they might make 20, 30 pitches. The average is probably more like 100, and there are people that pitch 200 and 300 people. And so it's a grind, and it is repetitive, but it's also kind of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I keep, thinking with all the innovations in technology, right, around, things like electric vertical flight, we ought to be able to figure out a way to sort of scale investor pitches, because you're given the same pitch. It's so repetitive. And we really need to be using digital media, I think, to simplify that process, sort of take a great video of a founder giving his best pitch, and then build a portfolio of frequently asked questions and use some AI to allow the investors to ask those questions and have it delivered at least in some sort of a personable way. But there's got to be a better way of doing this. Some smart engineers are going to come up with
like Loom and stuff, but the part that doesn't scale is like everybody's got different questions and different approaches to things, and the best pitchers are really good at reading that out of the investors and focusing on the things that matter to them, rather than just running through their deck for the 100th time.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. We always said the best pitch is when you don't even go into the pitch deck,
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. If you don't bring up your pitch deck, you probably did a really great job.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely counterintuitive to most folks who just want to put their deck up and talk through it.
Gotcha. I think that's really helpful. Let's jump back into the company a little bit. If a new engineer is starting out today, let's say, to try and solve a big problem, what do you think is something that they should do first to try and get going and be able to figure it out? Because I imagine that process is long, especially in the beginning.
Figure it out here.
Yeah, say like how could a new an engineer trying to do a project like the way you guys did it, how could they get started and solve a big problem?
Yeah, I'm going to start by putting a plug in. We're hiring, so go to our website and check out our job listings. And especially younger engineers, like the thing that really stands out is somebody who's actually built stuff. And whether that's code, if you're a software engineer, or hardware, if you're structures, or an electric propulsion system, if you're in electric propulsion, build something and test it, because that's what engineering is. It's not writing papers. It's not doing problem sets and getting really good at theory. You have to implement. And it really stands out when a young engineer has a portfolio of either coursework that had projects or their own independent projects are even better. And here's what I built, here's what I tested, here's what I learned, here's how it went. That's like far and above more indicative of can you actually cut it versus getting a perfect GPA at a top university.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes so much sense because what you guys are doing has to be done in the physical world, and it's different from software, right? Because if software breaks, you just change a line of code, hopefully, and you fix it. But if some of this stuff breaks, it can be dangerous, I imagine.
Yes, and we got lots of software work too, though. So, but it's different than consumer software. Yes, it does not just a broken line of code; it could crash the vehicle.
Yep, absolutely. So you got to have a certain level of rigor. Um, let's talk about real world applications for your technology. What do you see as the biggest, let's say, lowest hanging fruit, most near term application for this type of electric vertical propulsion system?
Yeah, so things you want to move in the air are relatively light, high value, and something that people want fast. Is really the three main drivers. Otherwise, you're going to put it on a much cheaper mode of transport on the ground. And what falls in that category are like parcels. Interestingly enough, electronics, pharma is a great one because drugs and other pharma products are relatively light. People want them quickly. They're specialized. They're very valuable. So you want to move that around in the air rather than on the ground. You're not going to put, a couple pill bottles on a large truck that's slow. So that's a really good example of what to move in the air. Other things are things that aren't commonly thought of, but parts for things that when they break are very expensive. So plants, aircraft, oil and gas rigs, when something goes down on those, those areas are losing sometimes 100K, sometimes $1 million a day. And they just want one little part. They want it now. That's a really good example. You're always going to put that in the air and the fastest thing. And one really cool thing about VTOL is you don't have to go through an airport, right? So rather than flying something into the closest airport, going through customs if it's international, and then putting on a truck and driving it over, you fly directly there. So you can fly, depending on what the vehicle is, really close in or maybe even on the property.
Wow. No, that's cool. What are the range limitations with this type of stuff? I mean, have you run into any?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, batteries are good. They're not that good. They're not nearly as good as gasoline, for better, for worse. And they are getting better, but it's a slow process. So the large urban air mobility companies that folks have probably heard of, like Joby and Archer, are good examples. They're looking at about 60 miles of range, VTOL max, and that's one of the limitations we're working to overcome with our stage system. So you get rid of a lot of the drag mass and power mismatch associated with VTOL flight, and you start looking at ranges in the 200 plus mile range. So you're
Sure.
getting regional flights, which is like actually pretty close to a helicopter. So you can really get a lot more performance that way. But you're not flying across the country. Like it's not happening anytime soon without putting some sort of fossil fuel on board.
Sure, sure. So the big industrial facility example, maybe you use a air freight to get it to the airport, and then from the airport you move it with your technology.
Exactly. Yeah. For the regional distribution.
Sure, that makes total sense. And what about weight limitations? You mentioned big industrial apps. You're able to support those large scale,
Yeah, I mean,
heavy things.
interestingly enough, most of the things for those industrial applications that they need quickly are not that big. So, hundreds of pounds, not tens of thousands. So, you're not flying in a train car, but you can do pretty significant weight. We're well past the drones that are flying around 5 and 10 pounds.
Gotcha. So now you mentioned military a little bit. Is there any cool military application you can tell us about that you're allowed to talk about?
Yeah, currently allowed to talk about any of it. So
Good,
that
good.
changes. Yeah, so we're, they're looking at the logistics capabilities of the industry, but they're also looking at us for a couple other reasons. And one is being able to provide other fixed wing aircraft with VTOL capability. So how do you divorce the requirement of having a runway for these aircraft to operate? So other unmanned aircraft that are deployed all around the world that have to operate out of a runway, how can you give them the flexibility to land on a pad somewhere, so that you can go fly these long range, long endurance missions with those platforms, but then land them vertically without a runway? That's something that only we can address. So there's not other tech out there that can do that. And then they're also looking at shorter range stuff. You talked about that earlier. Humanitarian and disaster response, which is super cool. So, a lot of places out there with not great infrastructure that, we fly in aid for whether there's a natural disaster or just general aid, and you got to get it out to the folks there. It's much easier to do it through the air autonomously without putting people in harm's way, so that you can help out.
No, for sure. Those are great applications. And imagine the impact you can make, because I think a lot of the places that need that sort of aid are located in places without great infrastructure, as you mentioned. I'm
Exactly.
curious to know if, maybe it'll actually leapfrog some infrastructure building, because you think about cell phones, for example. A lot of third world countries, they didn't even build landlines because of the cell phones. So maybe with this, instead of building roads everywhere, you've got these vehicles to move stuff around. From a logistical standpoint, it reduces the need to build, call it perfect infrastructure to every corner of a place.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of how that can happen. Even in areas that have the resources like Alaska, they don't put roads in a lot of places, right? They're flying in bush planes or ferries, and that's really the only way to get to a lot of places. So it's another good place for the tech where, they could put in those roads. They're capable of it. They have the money, but it just doesn't make economic sense. And doing it like this is a great way to get around that.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm getting ready to go down to Ecuador. My fiance is originally from there, and it's a small country, but it takes a long time to get in between certain places because of the roads. And I'm sure they'd love to be able to get delivery of, let's say, Amazon from a single centralized location to all the different points. If they could have this kind of delivery service, I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And one really cool thing about the electric is the price reduction from a helicopter. And so, the only people using helicopters are the ones flying in something that's needed really badly or very wealthy people. This will drop that price enough where other use cases become possible and make economic sense. That's in addition, obviously, to the climate impact, which is positive.
Yeah, for sure. And the other country I think of is Indonesia, which a lot of people don't realize is about 250 million people, one of the largest countries in the world, but it's really an island, a nation. So a place like that, it could be a home run.
Yeah, absolutely. You can move people back or move water, food back and forth really easily, for a lot less money.
Super cool. So we talked about the nice stuff, but now we got to get back into the business stuff, right? So what's the revenue model? Have you guys developed a revenue model? Is it licensing of the tech, or are you guys going to build out your own delivery services? How are you
Yeah,
going to do
so
that?
we're early in that stage. We're looking at a bunch of options. We've got multiple revenue models we've built, and we're trying to figure out one which actually makes sense, which is all I'll really talk about right now.
Okay, all right, cool. I like it. I'm sure it's nice that you've gone through Y Combinator, because you've got access to good financial ideas and advice that can help drive that forward. And I love how they focus on uh, technically led companies, because in the end, if you're building great tech, I feel like the revenue model will come. I remember the late 90s, everybody was talking smack about Google because they weren't making any money. But then when they rolled out their AdWords product, it went from
Yeah.
zero to hundreds of millions of dollars and multiple billions of dollars very quick. And same thing with Facebook is, the idea is build a fantastic product that users love, and then you can build a revenue model later. So I think it's important to remember that that stuff does work for the right tech. And whenever you start to go through a downturn, like it seems like we're going through now a little bit with the public markets, everybody comes in and wants to beat everybody up about the revenue model. Same thing happened in the dot-com world. So to all the founders out there, just stay the course and you're going to be fine. It'll take a couple of years and things will be on the upswing again.
Yeah, a lot of the best companies were born out of those downturns. The
For
ones
sure.
that could muddle through it and come out the other side were the ones that grew into the biggest companies.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, that leads me to ask, what are your aspirations for the company? How big would you like to see it get? And are you thinking of, partnering with somebody else down the road with a bigger company, or do you want to be a founder-led company and just see it all the way through?
Yeah, our primary goal is to grow it into both manufacturer and operator of the product. We're always interested in what makes the most sense though for the company. And so one thing that's hard about aerospace is it's really hard to build out the infrastructure to build all the products. There's a lot that goes into that, and partnering with somebody who already has that in place actually can make a lot of sense, especially to get moving faster and not have to pour all that CapEx in to that process. So we'll definitely look at that when we're ready. But our primary goal is to build it ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a ton of sense. And I think there's going to be so many companies that come out of this, let's call it physical innovation movement. I think the last 20 years we had a digital innovation movement, but now there's a lot more innovation happening in physical infrastructure, which I think is super awesome. And I think there's going to be even more companies than there were in digital, because I think there's fewer, let's call it network effects, winner take all. So you're going to have a lot of companies. And I do think that, to your point, there's going to be a lot of M&A activity among some of the bigger companies that have the infrastructure in place. If you're a media company, there's no way you could have bought Google. It just wasn't going to happen. But when you think of aerospace, when you think of energy, think of these different oil and gas infrastructure, and also the idea of energy transition, in the end, it's physical stuff, right? So I think this is going to be an amazing movement, even bigger than the digital movement that we've seen, with affecting more companies, more people, and affecting the physical world in some really cool ways.
I'm biased, but I couldn't agree more. I'm super excited to see that hardware and deep tech is got a lot of momentum starting the last 5-ish years, and I hope it just keeps growing. So.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you're hiring. Talk about building a team. How big is your team now? What are some of the pain points to building a great team? And what are your goals with that going forward?
Yeah, so we're 15 people now. We've got 10 open roles. That's kind of what we view as our required core team for scaling up to these bigger prototypes to start. So it's mostly engineering focused. The hardest part is finding folks who can thrive in an environment in the hardware world that's similar to the more traditional startup world, where it's not well defined. You don't get handed requirements. You get to go generate those on your own ad hoc with your teammates, and you're moving really fast, and everything changes week to week. And people that are good at that and they love it. And it's in my opinion, it's way more fun. You're actually making an impact every day. You're making progress every day. You have a say in everything, and you get to build something that's much more impressive with a small team and a faster pace than if you're plugged into a giant company that's got all these processes in place and things take forever, and you get pigeonholed over here, work on this widget, and that's it. So those folks are hard to find, but that it's really great when there's a good fit.
Yeah, for sure. Were you the only founder of the company, or did you have other founders on your team?
No, I've got a co-founder, Evan, and we know each other from our SpaceX days, so we
Oh,
overlap.
nice.
It's like 3 or 4 years, yeah.
So SpaceX, did you ever get to meet Elon?
Yeah, multiple times.
Good stuff. How early on in the company were you there? How many employees were there when you got there?
It was 1,000 when I got there in 2010. It's 10,000 now, I think, or more. Which
Oh
is
my gosh.
when I left, which was a little after 5 years of my tenure there. It was at 5 or 6,000, so it grew a lot while I was there.
Gotcha. I should know this, but is SpaceX a separate, completely separate entity, or is it under the Tesla umbrella, or how's it structured?
It's separate.
Gotcha. And I don't think it's public, is it? Is it still private, like a private entity?
Private. I think it might be the most valuable private company in the world.
Yeah, for sure. It's got to be up there.
Yeah, it's going up more right now. I think they're just announced a fundraising round at 125 billion valuation, I think.
That's not too bad. Now, did you guys get any equity? Did he hook the
Yeah,
team up with?
it's a startup, so there's the equity involved. Yeah.
So that's a good thing. And a private company like that, I think there's liquidity now available with some of these exchanges, or is it completely illiquid?
No, yeah, they provide some liquidity options for employees.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a huge change, call it financial or fintech innovation that's happened the last 15 years is make it possible for people to get some liquidity so they don't have to just sit there and hold the stock forever and ever when it's not public.
Yeah, especially for companies that are focused on not being public, like SpaceX is.
Yeah, makes sense. So walk me through the process of, okay, you're at SpaceX and you're thinking, all right, I want to go off and do my own thing. I think this is one of the things that is like most everybody wants to know. How do you take that leap, move from call it a nice, safe thing like SpaceX, and then make the leap to do a new thing?
It's been a little bit of a dream of mine for a long time. Uh, and Evan and I started putting together concepts before we took the leap, and actually did some basic engineering work to prove to ourselves that it could work, so that we knew it was possible and knew it made sense. But in the end, you just got to go for it. I mean, like there's no way to beat around the bush. I think it's really tough to have one foot, in the door of the startup and one foot back in your old job, where you're trying to do it on the side, which is safer and like reduces risk. But I think when you're ready, you just got to go for it. Obviously, set yourself up so that if 3-6 months in, it's not going anywhere, you can go back or go to somewhere else. But you just got to go. And the other thing is that investors and other people want to partner with you, potential employees. Like if you're working on it part-time, they're probably not going to join in, right? Like they just don't know if you're committed. So
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
you need your personal support system, and you got to just go for it.
So a lot of founders tell me they had like this oh shit moment, right? Like they broke away from the dream job and then they're on their own. Let's say it's been a couple months since the last paycheck from the regular paycheck. Did you guys go through that process where you looked at each other like, oh my gosh, what do we just do?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's pretty common. Getting into YC really helped. That was kind of our first big validation that, okay, there's something here. We can make a little bit of money, nothing like you're used to before, but enough to survive. And so that was great. But yeah, there was definitely a period where we're like, if this doesn't go up at some point in the next X number of months, we've got to, cut loose.
Yeah, for sure. And how did you get through that? What was it that propelled you guys to keep moving forward?
I don't know. I think part of it's just our nature. It's just like, we said we're doing this, let's do it. and we're just going to go full speed ahead. And, if we don't make it, at least we tried. And so you just got to get over that first hurdle. But
Yeah.
dwell on it too much, it's just going to get in the way.
I'll throw out some advice, having done it a couple of times myself, is keep personal overhead to a minimum.
Yep.
Because it always takes a lot longer than you think.
Yes, no, that's a good piece of advice, both like obligations and monetary.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, cool. So when you guys got the Y Combinator, tell me about like when it was the moment when the deal was sealed. Did you guys celebrate? Did you like go out and have some drinks together? Or did you say, oh my gosh, here we go, we better work even twice as hard now?
Yeah, I mean, we were in an Airbnb in Mountain View. We just had the in-person interview, and it's notorious for them saying like, no matter what, you're going to feel like you bombed the interview. It's exactly how we felt. So we were just hanging out, kind of like, oh, that didn't seem to go so well. Then we got the call, and like, you're in. And so, we went and got a little celebratory whiskey and called a few people and went home and went back to work.
Nice, good stuff. So it's up in Mountain View. So is it I don't know that area too well, but I know it's Northern California. Is that around the famous Sand Hill Road? Is that around in there?
Yeah, it's right in that area.
Super cool. So when you guys were driving in there, it must have been, you have a little trepidation going in. I've driven around there before, and you can just kind of feel the sense that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of major companies that have come out of this area.
Yeah, it's definitely got an awesome history. I went to Stanford, so I'm pretty familiar with the area. It's Sand Hill is literally adjacent to campus. So it was kind of like going back to a really familiar spot, which was nice. But it is intimidating.
Yeah, for sure. Stanford's a great university, sort of really a nice place to come out of if you're trying to do startup, because the ecosystem is so good.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've got probably more close friends that I can count on one hand that started companies from my time there. So definitely it's known for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple folks from Stanford on the podcast, and it's unbelievable to hear about the ecosystem, partner ecosystem out there.
Yeah.
I think you ought to have your units on Stanford for sure. Like, just as a showcase.
Have what?
Your technology should be there on Stanford, I'm sure you could think of applications at the college.
Fly them up there at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super good stuff. So here's a question for you. A lot of people, you have to be a little bit maniacal, I think, to make it through startup land. Have you had to sort of be super stubborn to get to where you at, or are you more of like go with the flow?
My day-to-day life, I'm pretty go with the flow. But you've got to be stubborn. Like everybody talks about the ups and downs, and they're very real. You can have a huge high one day, and an hour later you have a huge low, and sometimes it feels like things are going great. Sometimes it feels like you're going to fail next week, and you got to just take it in stride and keep plugging away and not give up. I mean, it's really all you can do. And that's how you get through those times, is that stubbornness. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been told before I'm stubborn, and I think that's an insult that I actually feel good about when I hear it, because it's like you need that to be able to make it through some of this stuff.
Yes. And it's very different than a job. The sense that you have to like execute on this part, you have to execute on everything, and a lot of you've got investors, you've got employees, and a lot of stakeholders involved. So.
No, that's super cool. I feel we talked a lot about some of the personal stuff, but is there anything, let's say, number one, are you guys looking for any investors? Are you accepting new capital at this point? Can they reach out to you on LinkedIn and get in touch? I think investors watch us a little bit.
Yeah, so we aren't raising right now, but we will be relatively soon. Uh, we did a fundraise early this year. We've got decent runway, but we'll be raising on the back of some tech progress in the next 6-ish months. So always happy to talk to people and start a relationship. LinkedIn's good. Jamie@talon.com is good. And of course, our website has like a contact us. So there's lots of ways to get a hold of me.
Super cool. So investors, you're hiring. So if you're a young engineer that's excited about this, reach out. And also, I'm sure strategic partners. Are there any kind of commercial areas and partnerships where you're trying to reach certain types of companies?
Yeah, I mean, anyone in logistics of really of any sort, pharma, we just like talking to people. So to hear what's out there, what the needs are. So always happy to talk to folks in those fields, transportation analysis, oil and gas. Basically, if you want stuff moved quickly, I want to talk to you.
Oh, good stuff. Well, Jamie, this has been great. It's been my pleasure having you on Energy Superheroes, and you're definitely somebody that we're going to track and watch as the company grows. The company is Talon, and we've had Jamie Gull on the show. Jamie, it's been great having you, and look forward to checking in with you maybe a year down the road.
Yeah, it's been awesome.